I'd like to welcome everybody to Reimagining Philanthropy, Give Cash and Relinquish Power webinar hosted here by the Family Independence Initiative. My name is Jesús Gerena. I'm the CEO of the Family Independence Initiative. And we want to welcome you and really thank you for taking the time for this very important conversation. Want to first talk a little bit about our unique approach, our strength-based approach. What we are doing is we are not a program or a service. We are looking back in community in the way that people are connecting and supporting one another and investing in that through unrestricted one-time cash investments or multiple times, as well as we are not coming up with top-down approaches. Our strength-based approach is on people being able to define what success is and how to be able to pursue it. So it is community, it is cash, it is choice in the hands of people to be able to recognize their initiative, their creativity, to be able to find success. And that's where we start. And many of us in philanthropy and even government have been fighting a war on poverty for decades. We know that not much has changed over the last 50 plus years. And I believe it's time for us to do something different. It's time for us to reimagine philanthropy, give cash, relinquish power, invest in community, and make poverty escapable for good. And I'm really excited to have this conversation and being joined by four phenomenal people. I'm going to start and do some introductions. First is Brenda Miller, who is our community advocate and a former small business owner. She's worked as a children's librarian for the city of Georgetown, just outside of Austin, Texas, where she formed a team volunteer program and launched a summer reading program. She has volunteered in numerous roles within local government, including serving as a judge for her precinct, a clerk, and currently as a volunteer deputy registrar. Brenda serves on the FII Advisory Council in Austin and is an FII member. Welcome, Brenda. Michelle Botus is also a longtime FII member and friend. She is based in Boston, Massachusetts. She's the director of cross-agency initiatives in the Child, Youth, and Family Division at Massachusetts Department of Mental Health. Prior to her role, she served as area director of training for the DMH Metro Boston and is certified as a diversity trainer by the Massachusetts Office of Human Resources Division. Michelle enjoys volunteering and has served as a judge at Harvard Business School's healthcare competition, where teams of students pitch business solutions to address healthcare issues like diabetes and obesity. Michelle is a PhD candidate in leadership and change at Antioch University and serves on the board of directors of the Pine Street Inn and Project Hope Boston. And welcome, Michelle. Also with us from Boston is Melissa Luna, who's the executive director of GreenLight Fund Boston. Prior to joining GreenLight, Melissa led programming and managed a national portfolio of grantees in the fields of women in politics and sex trafficking at Swanee Hunt Alternatives. Melissa has more than 15 years of experience in nonprofit management, strategic planning, and program evaluation. She launched programs focused on youth development, civic engagement, and broad systems change in the city of Boston during her 10-year tenure at Sociedad Latina. She currently serves on the boards of the Phillips Brooks Housing Association and March Forward, Massachusetts. Melissa and GreenLight Fund have been FII partners and supporters for many years, being one of our key foundations in launching our work there in Boston. And finally, we have Brion Oaks, who is the first ever Chief Equity Officer for the City of Austin. In this capacity, he is responsible for working with city leadership and the community to create an equity framework to be adopted by all departments and offices in Austin city government. As Chief Equity Officer, Brion facilitates dialogue and organizational practices that supports the development and adoption of equity as a shared value by all residents. He served as the technical expert in addressing equity that is applied to citywide policies, programs, practices, and budget decisions with an overall vision to make Austin the most livable city for all. And this week, Brion and the city, in partnership with FII, launched a second round of direct cash investments to support families impacted financially by COVID-19. think a fund of over 9 million. So congrats on that work. And thank you all for participating today. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on how we're going to be reimagining philanthropy. Before we dive in, just for all those participating, we have 2 housekeeping items. First, there will be at the end a time for questions and answers. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen at any time. We'll get to as many as we can. And we're also posting on social media, so if you're joining us in that work, please use the hashtag #TrustAndInvest. Let's get started. First to Brenda and Michelle. Tell us more about yourself and your family. What experience brought you to connect with an organization like FII? Go for it, Brenda.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if Michelle. I was having always been a community activist. I'm always engaged in new programs that I can share with the community, and having experienced things myself, as I'm a widow and disabled, and life itself kind of threw me in things, so I got to experience some of those things. And then when I heard about how FII was like giving you cash and trusted us to be able to know where we needed the funds, because we know poor folks know how to live on less than a dime and make it stretch. So we'll put the money where we feel we need it. That's a good feeling. So that was what initially brought me to the table, because FII said, hey, we're going to give you the cash and you decide on where you needed it best. So it was the philosophy of the FII that brought me more into it.
Thank you, Brenda. So more about myself. I am the mother of 4 children and 1 grandson. I suddenly became a single mother in 2001. And at that time, I had a high school diploma and I was a CNA. I moved back to Boston. I realized that it's very expensive to live in Boston. And I just knew I needed to further my education. So I went back to school, and within 10 years, I achieved an associate's degree, a bachelor's, and then a master's. But I did that while working 2 jobs and also accumulating student loan debt. Not much. I did get scholarships, but when so for me, what happened with me is that every degree that I received, it really increased my my earnings, my earning potential. But what happens is when you get to a certain place, and everything falls off. So all of the supports that I received to get to where I was, whether it was childcare, because when I became single, my son was 9 months old. So I had a 9-month-old, a 5-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 19-year-old. And so doing all those, the way I was able to do all those things was just getting involved in different community-based organizations. Whatever they had going on, I was there. And I just became this sponge to just really absorb and receive any kind of info. So, and it's ironically the person that's on the picture that's on the I guess she's on the flyer, but Bev Hillier, her and her husband were one of the, I think maybe one of the original, 12 families in Boston. And her and I were friends, and she'd seen all of the things that I've been doing. And I remember her telling me about this. She didn't call it a program. She said, well, I want to form a group. And it seemed a little ambiguous, but I knew Bev, and I said, you know what? Okay, I'll do it. You're asking a lot of information, but I trust you now. And so when I joined FII, at that point, I had owned my own home and I had an advanced degree, but I also had children that I wanted to send to college, because I knew that, especially for women and Black women, all the studies show that the pathway out of poverty is through higher education. And living in Boston, Massachusetts, there is a lot of competitions because there are more colleges and universities than many other places. And so I loved that I was invited to join, And they didn't hold it against me that I owned a home and that I had a degree and I was making a certain amount of money. But they did listen and knew that my goal that I expressed was to help my daughter go to college. And they did exactly what they did. She was able to take advantage of the Bertha Miller Scholarship. And she actually received that, I think, twice. She was able to finish high school and then she went on to finish her undergrad degree and is actually working in her field. And so I think I'll stop right there, but that's what, my introduction to FII, and it absolutely has changed my life in terms of the connections that I have. The social capital has really increased exponentially. So that's it.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Brenda and Michelle. I think it's really important as we have these conversations that that part of the community, oftentimes people like settle on to the cash, and definitely cash has a huge amount of value, but it's the connections and the building of those relationships or strengthening of those relationships that has a lasting effect, as it has been in my life and everybody else's for that matter. To Melissa and Brian, as you know, our strength-based model centers on capital choice and a supporting community. How do the stories you just heard from Michelle and Brenda differ from other approaches you've seen across philanthropy? And what has been your experience in championing a strength-based approach in communities across Boston and Austin? Melissa.
You want me to go first? Sure. Thank you all. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about our work with FII. I think for me, as I'm hearing Michelle and Brenda talk about their engagement with FII, what has come across loud and clear is the trust in families and to know where the money goes and where they should be putting those dollars. Since this is a kind of webinar on reimagining philanthropy, we can at least acknowledge there's some limitations and challenges to the way that we approach our work. I would say, what feels different is often in philanthropy, we are talking about solving issues, solving poverty. We have a real focus on outcomes and strategies. But if I can just get a little sappy for a moment, the origin of the word philanthropy is to love people. And I think, when we talk about outcomes and we talk about trajectories, we do this because in philanthropy, we love our communities and we love our people. And I do think we need to talk about how we hold front and center the agency of the people we love in our communities so that they can own their own power to reach those outcomes and trajectories. I would say in our experience working in Boston is that we're lucky that we've done this work both in Boston and Cincinnati. I can talk about the Boston experience, but FII's approach really aligns with how we do our work at GreenLight. We think about it as how can we provide capital that's unrestricted? How can we build a supportive community? How can we trust these organizations to do really good work on the ground? And so for us, investing in FII was both alignment of how we do our work, but also a real need for addressing the needs of families, and in particular after the recession. And so we're lucky that in Boston, we weren't the only ones to support FII. There was a whole coalition of funders that came forward, and that years later, though, I would say we still have trouble describing what FII does. People are like, what exactly do they do? So you just give them the money, and it's like, no, we invest in families, and we're invested in them, and we're providing capital so that they can reach the outcomes that they believe they need to, and that ultimately that we're really trying to, we're trusting our families to do this work. I would say the other piece I would say is that recently there's been some real energy about wanting to put these dollars directly into the hands of families. And in GreenLight, actually in Boston, we reinvested dollars back in, knowing that it was timely and that we needed to do more, and that we needed a both and strategy. We needed to support our organizations, but we also needed to be investing in families. And in particular, as we move forward, there's some real challenges with unemployment coming forward and the cutoff of benefits. And so this is a really timely conversation for us to be thinking about how we reimagine philanthropy and how we can partner with FII to be able to reach these families and really trust and move and change outcomes.
So I'll get all sappy too. And I'll tell you that Miss Brenda probably doesn't remember, but my first experience with FII was that the Texas director for FII, Ivana Neary, invited me to a community workshop and literally had me crying that morning, because we talked about experience in life of being ashamed of poverty or being ashamed of poor. And I told a story and experience that I had when I was in middle school, and my family was really struggling to make ends meet. And there was a field trip. And the shame that I experienced in being the kid that had a post-dated check that I had to take to my teacher and explain to her that, you know, my mom says, please don't cash this check until 2 weeks, right? And so I think that for a lot of issues or troubles that families go through, there's a history of us to blame folks, but in essence, I think it's time for us to start blaming the systems and institutions that have been built around our communities, right? So the fact that we would even have a system or institution that denies a kid from being able to go on a field trip because of economic reasons, right? So really pushing us, I think especially in the space of government, to really think about how we've designed and we've developed systems in the first place. But I also think about to look at historically the sort of system that we've built around philanthropy and social services and all the threads of bias and racial bias that runs through that too, right? In terms of who's deserving and who's not, who's eligible and who isn't eligible. All of the rules and regulations I put on what you can use these resources for, which makes the judgment that we don't think families can make good decisions for themselves, right? And so for me, I feel that the work that FII is doing is so important because it's challenging us to really sort of reimagine and rethink poverty in our communities, but to also really sort of rethink and challenge the assumptions that we've made in our systems. And so for us, the City of Austin, we are so proud of the partnership with FII and the work that we've been able to do, especially around the response to the pandemic. And I'm sure we'll talk later about that. But I definitely think coming from the role and perspective of government, this is just really an essential conversation for us to start to really challenge the historical design and development of a lot of our social services and support structures around families, and really sort of challenge ourselves and how we've historically thought about that and what kind of values does that say for us.
Thank you both, and thank you for, yes, putting love front and center in the room or in the webinar as we're talking about these approaches. I think as we've been dealing with this pandemic, that essence of how we care and love one another as a community, to our neighbors, as a country, to those who are being affected. It sort of continues to be overlooked as we mourn the deaths of so many, the hundreds of thousands now. So I really appreciate that, and it's our opportunity to bring that back into the conversation and make sure that as we're dealing about what our tomorrow is, that is front and center. So thank you. With that said, a lot of the cracks that we've seen in our systems are now craters, right? And we're dealing with this inside of our communities. And to Brenda and Michelle, I'm curious, as we're approaching the 6-month mark here, or we've met it, in the COVID-19 world, and we look to what the next 6 to 12 months in dealing with the social and economics effects of the pandemic. What are your hopes for your family and your community? And I'll let Michelle maybe lead this time.
All right, so I think the first thing, my hope is that my family continues to stay healthy. We've been fortunate about that. In terms of the community, you know, I am very keenly aware that, we're focused on the physical issues with COVID, but there are a lot of folks that are experiencing mental health concerns. There is a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety around it. And so my hope is that families and the community is able to provide those types of services. You know, it's for me, it's not, you can't achieve some things if you're not healthy. And so folks may not have COVID-19, but they're dealing with day to day, whether it's, you know, anxiety over not having a job, not anxiety over getting ill. And so for my community, what I'm hoping is that our community will continue to invest in simple things. Families can get telemedicine, but they may not have the laptops or the Chromebooks. And so I am hoping that my community steps up and really focus on those who are I hate the word underprivileged, but those who are not thought of, and that they continue to make sure that they level that playing field. I have much more to say, but I'm going to leave it at that. I may write a book on the subject of equity.
I'm gonna just jump in there. You want me to go ahead, Jesus? For my community, certainly I piggyback on Michelle. I want my family to be safe. First and foremost, because I'm actually virtual tutoring or schooling my grandchildren at home, because my kids, my son is an essential worker. So therefore, him and his wife both have to work. And then we have that fear. There's a whole process of that. But also agreeing with Michelle on, we have homeless that are out there. And so expanding my concerns to my community is that we make sure that we get masks to the homeless, and we find a way for them to get to testings, because those are the most effective, because they're vulnerable, they're out there, and there's no protection for them at all. They just go somewhere. But at the same time, they infiltrate our community, so we need to make sure that they're safe. My second concern is for my community to make sure that go ahead and be bold and do the things that you need to do to make sure we're safe. Let's get away from the political aspect of things and you know, provide masks, make testing for our children available through the school system. When they walk in that door, you know, we want our babies safe. This thing is bigger than, it's not about race, it's not about color, it's not about money, and it does kill. I actually lost an aunt last week in Houston from COVID-19. So having experienced that firsthand, I even realized how much more it is needed. And because she was socially, economically, she's 78 years old, you know, living on a fixed income. So she wasn't able to get the best quality of medical care that she could have gotten had she been on a job, maybe with better insurance. And again, like Michelle, I have a list, but I'll just, you know, stop there. That's my immediate concern under COVID-19.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And I think that I love that you both are bringing up the systems challenges that is affecting so many as a result of this pandemic, and disappropriately affecting African-American and Latinx communities as a result of that, as we're seeing the bigger death rates there. And so to Brion and Melissa, COVID-19 is killing hundreds of people each day, but also laying bare that systemic economic and racial inequities in our country. As we begin to rebuild, what should the new normal look like for philanthropy and government, given that? And do you see examples of where a new normal is already in play? And I'll start with Brion this time.
I think that, you know, in terms of like COVID, you know, I feel like COVID has really exposed a lot of issues that as a city we knew that we had, but I would say that COVID has exposed it and put a bigger sense of urgency around it. And, you know, to give you an example of that, I see COVID is really, it's like two disasters in one. There's a health component of COVID in terms of people who are getting sick and being hospitalized and dying from it. And then there's the financial component of COVID, like how many families have experienced financial hardship due to not being able to go to work or reduced hours and all those different areas. And I will tell you that we're seeing it play out on both sides of the response in our city. And I'm trying to be hopeful in this moment of time that it really sort of gives us the energy and the courage to make some of those tough changes. I thought, you know, Ms. Brenda's talked about being bold, right? And I think even in the work that we did around COVID with FII, I think is an example of that in terms of this, our initial project with FII was early on in the pandemic, and we had a pilot project that we did with $2 million to do direct financial assistance to families. And for us as a city, that was unheard of. And we had a lot of people that were like, we can't give money directly to people, you know, that's a no-go, can't happen. But given the context of the situation and trying to respond to the pandemic, the number of families that we had in need, we could not have done it, right? And because that we did it, it really, for me, I felt like it really elevated the bar on what we're able to do as a city. The fact that in 72 hours, we were able to disperse $2 million and I think help almost close to 2,000 families with economic support, it sort of really sort of showed what's possible. And I think sometimes, you know, we sort of say the hardest part of this work sometimes is just being able to even visualize or imagine the possibilities. But for us, I think doing that pilot turned into, you know, this opportunity that when council awarded more funding to the financial support, we went from 2 million to Jesus announcing that 9 million, right? And it's all in direct financial assistance. And so, you know, if you think about it, we completely shifted the bar on how the city of Austin looks at providing economic support to families, right? And got over the hurdle of us sort of saying that we can actually give this assistance directly to families, right? And that's a game changer for us. And I think that as we move forward, in this sort of disaster also lies an opportunity for us to begin to reimagine many other systems and things. And it's created the door for us to be able to do that. So it's kind of like this irony as it relates to COVID-19, in that the disaster of the pandemic has actually sort of opened the door. I say sometimes within every city, you have these do not touch boxes. And this is actually given the opportunity to open up a lot of the do not touch boxes. You know, at the same time, we were actually just starting out a whole process to reimagine public safety and policing in our city, which is a huge conversation too. And so I feel that from coming from that government perspective, that this has sort of created that opportunity and you know, to be bold, right? To have the courage to really look at how we do things and to do it different and challenge ourselves in that.
You want to add now, Melissa?
Sure. So I would say, you know, as we start to think of what the new normal looks like in philanthropy, there's some emerging trends that we're seeing here that I'm really hopeful remain the new normal and inspire the new normal that we want to see, and in partnership with organizations in the nonprofit sector. I would say first, you know, the movement towards putting cash directly in the hands of families. We've seen a lot of movement across country. We've seen it in the Boston area. And I think, you know, this is really spurring that conversation of what role can philanthropy have in terms of universal basic income. How are we taking these learnings and really thinking and expanding and pushing on what we can start to think of as new normals here? I think, you know, we've started to talk about systems change and how, I mean, realistically, how long systems change can happen. But I will say, you know, there's a lot of funders and donors in this space that are starting to figure out, well, what do they mean by systems change? What role can they have? And I challenge every funder to figure out what role will they play. And, you know, how we think of FII as a systems change in itself. So how can you start to think about systems change and incorporating FII into your systems change approach and thinking about that funding? You know, I think third, everyone's talking about getting close to the issues. Like, let's get proximate to the issues. Let's hear more. But, you know, I would actually challenge everybody to say, we have experts. We should be bringing the experts into our decision making. I think we've talked about changing the way we operate, challenging these assumptions. Let's acknowledge that philanthropy has been rooted in white supremacy practices, and really, like, you know, really start to decentralize that and really democratize that, so that we're bringing the experts in, that they're helping not only to inform our strategy, they're making those decisions with us. And I think, you know, as we move forward, we've been doing some of this work at GreenLight, but we know we have a lot more to go. And finally, I think just because I've been thinking a lot about social capital, you know, when we think about philanthropy and those of us who are in those spaces, we have a lot of social capital. How can we start to rethink how we use our social capital to really benefit families and rethink how we move forward? Because I do think as we start to realize how the world works, and we all have known that it's who you know and how important social capital is, for those of us who are in these spaces and in these roles, what more can we be doing on an individual basis? What more can we be doing on a systemic basis to really start to prioritize the love of our people and start to help build those social capital? So that's something I'm still kind of thinking about. How is it that we can be doing that in philanthropy? But I hope as we move forward to this new normal, that we start to critically think about that and find creative ways to solve for some of our biggest challenges.
I really appreciate that. I think one of the things that I always tell folks is our strength-based approach is not copyrighted or trademarked to us. You also can recognize community. You also can invest in it. You also can relinquish that power and put it and put that decision making, as well as be led by the communities, to your point, Melissa, who are closest to these issues, and really develop and think about your impact in that way. We do have, right, our Up Together platform, and for all those listening in, you can go to uptogether.org to learn how it can help facilitate that process. But yeah, we don't want to hold anybody back in that way. If anything, we're trying to encourage in that systems change thinking to be able to get more folks to come along. And I guess as a follow-up to both you, Melissa, and Brian, what do you think is the leap that people can take to be able to get there? Like, what is that? What will it take for them to be able to act? Melissa, we'll come back to you and then go to Brian.
Sure. I would say, I mean, we've known each other for years, so we often talk about our years as organizers together. And I always think about it from the terms of like power. And when what we're talking about in this new normal is the realization that some people believe they have to give up their power in order for other people to step into it. And I would actually argue, because as I've mentioned, we have family partners in our advisory council and our grant making process, that it's not a zero-sum game, that really what they have done is help grow our power together, and that they're helping to inform our process. And so, you know, I think it is, for me, it's just that psychological barrier of getting over the, like, if someone's taking a spot, that means someone else is not in there, and that we're giving this up. But truly, it is the family partners have really evolved our conversation and really helped us to think things a little bit more critically. They have helped us to have a different conversation that we should be having at these tables. And I would say, you know, it can all be solved. Any single challenge I tell you right now that we have faced can be solved. Like, we have meetings on Saturdays instead of the weekdays so that our family partners can join. We make sure that we send materials ahead of time and talk through the relevance of them so that everyone has the same context in the room. I mean, everything I might present as a challenge is really solvable. It's just the idea of, are we truly really comfortable with giving up that power? And I think that's the question that everyone has to sit with. But the part that I will tell you is your power grows when you start to grow your power together.
Well said.
Yeah, Melissa is right on point, right? It's really a shifting of the power dynamics, right? And it's the shift to really say that we actually believe and trust in the families to be able to make the best decisions. I actually think that in a way, by following the FII model and providing direct cash assistance, we actually are unlocking the innovation and creativity of families to problem solve. And, you know, one of the principles that's sort of centered in racial equity work is that the people closest to the problem are the ones that have the best solution. And so in the spirit of this initiative, really the families are closest to the problem and the financial hardships, so they're the ones that actually have the best solution. And let's trust that, because they'll come up with more innovative solutions and creativity of how to stretch that dollar than we can ever imagine as an institution. And so it is sort of a change in that power dynamic to really sort of say that we're going to put the power in the hands of families to make those decisions, and not agencies and institutions or philanthropy to make those decisions for them.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love, Michelle, your story. I think we've shared in the past. I grew up with basically you as my mom, right? My mom was very much the same way in her actions and in her experience. And yeah, like once she was put in that position in our household, she was able to figure out things for us. And she always knew the best way to spend a dollar. So let's do that. One last question as we move on to the questions and answer period here. So what's the first step, right? As we're thinking about this leap and really relinquishing power, in your opinion, what is the one thing philanthropy and government can act on today that would reimagine how we create a more equitable society? And why don't we start with Brenda and go to Michelle, Melissa, and Brian last.
Wow, I first want to give kudos to Brian and the city of Austin and their government for being bold enough to try something new. Oftentimes, government and cities are a little hesitant to be that way. So, I mean, really amazing, just amazing. Take my hat off to you. But in my opinion, and I don't know that this can be achieved as right away, but there are things that can be implemented. And I feel like we both know that Black and brown people are always affected. We always say, you know, when Caucasian America get a headache, Black and brown, we get sick and go to the hospital. We get in a coma. So if the business leaders and the organizations and the philanthropists and the donors all kind of work together with the employers to create incentives within the job to grow and allow that training to happen right there on the job, and look there and promote within so they can take management, offer childcare, a discount on childcare, offer affordable housing. Hey, if you get, you know, want to purchase your home, we're going to hook up with FII. Maybe we can't give you all the down payment, but here's some money, you know, to help towards that. Any encouragement, and make sure that you increase affordable housing. It's expensive to live in Georgetown. And we have very limited, and I'm only speaking on my own experience, very limited affordable housing. And certainly, guess who it's difficult for us to live is the Black and brown community. I do think COVID-19, yes, it was a bad thing, but I'm a firm believer in every bad storm, there is a light somewhere in the middle. And because of COVID, it had shedded a stronger light on how we're treated as Black and brown folks. It put the light on it. Otherwise, you know, it's been there forever, but now we're paying attention because of COVID-19. We're looking closer. because these are the most people that are affected, that are dying, they have no place to live, they're getting evicted out of their homes. So if an employer you're working for them and they can offer some benefits, that you get discount childcare, you get discount if you want to purchase a home, you get a raise, you get an opportunity to step into a better position. And yes, look at the Black and brown folks for the promotion, and that's not giving us a pass. It's kind of saying, evening up the playing field. And in order to do that, you're going to have to look at us a little stronger and give us the opportunities so that we can get up there even and give us a path to middle class, because that path is now gone. I could go on, but I will stop. I mean, I have a whole page, but also I do want to say this. Employers and business owners have a way to connect us to lower cost credit. Oftentimes minorities, we're thrown to the wolves, so we go somewhere for a quick check or quick whatever, and those interest rates are 23 to 32%, because the banks, when we walk in the door, for me, they see my skin tone, it's been kissed by the sun, pretty sure she ain't gonna be able to pay. I mean, really, this is true. This is the kind of America we live in, and we're just now being honest about it. And so I would encourage employers and organizations to help with that, direct to lower cost financing. But again, I said I wouldn't get on my soapbox, which I can easily do, so I will stop there.
That was great. Thank you so much, Brenda. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. But just to say, I say this all the time, and I actually share studies, like redlining is not something of the past.
Mm-hmm.
Something that is currently and actively happening. And if y'all need it, email me. I'll give you the data to prove it. Go for it, Michelle.
All right, so I just had to read the question again. First, I want to say I echo everything that you said, Brenda. Everything that you said. For me, and the question again, to remind those that are listening, is one thing that philanthropy and government can act on today that would reimagine how we create a more equitable society. I think earlier I talked about equity and not meaning equal, but it means to level the playing field. And sometimes, or not sometimes, always, that means to give more, right? In order for you to level the playing field, you have to give more to those that haven't had it. So the one thing the government can do, and I have to applaud Austin. I say Austin had the right idea. They gave money. So anyone that's listening to this webinar today that really, really want to do something, they really want to invest in reimagining or resetting equity, I say today, give to FII. That's it. And no, he did not pay me to say that, but I honestly, let me just say.
What I was going to say is give it to FII means give it to people. I got you.
Listen, I can tell you how this, and I haven't, and I don't want it to be, I moved to tears, but I'll hold them back. The people, the families that I know who have been involved in FII, I can't tell you how much of a difference and how much impact FII had on not just them, but their children. The impact is, it spreads. And so we often, and so how easy is it for folks to give millions of dollars to people that don't really need it, right? But to give families a $1,200, whatever a month it is, a stimulus check is a big problem. There's folks in government that think a $400 a week is not enough or it's too much. And I think that's one of the problems. So the government really needs to shift your thinking, right? Just as much as you want for yourself, you should want for all families. And that includes universal health care, that includes universal child care, because those are some of the things that can sink someone into poverty like that. And so I know in my experience, the folks that have been able to do that, not just here in Boston, but in Austin and in Oakland, right? And down there in Louisiana, where we visited, 5 years ago, is given to FII, all right? Because FII, what they do is look at families as the experts. They will never come in there and say, you need to do this, 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 and that. And when a family has that opportunity to be asked, well, what do you want to do? What are your goals? Because guess what? A lot of us, we didn't have parents that were able to do that for us, right? And so FII took that approach. Like, what is it that you want to do? And how do you want to get there? Okay, well, guess what? You need money. Because every time I tell my kids, every time I step out the house, it costs me, it's cha-ching, cha-ching. There is nothing, nowhere you can go that doesn't cost money. So lastly, again, to answer that question, because it's easy to send cash. It's easy to wire money over. And that's what they can do. Support FII.
If I can just add with her on that, you're on it, girl. FII, I wanted to say that too, has already have the platform to disperse the money. So those that are interested in doing it, you don't have to. You already have an organization. I do agree with you 100%. There's an organization already there, knows how to disperse the money without any problems. And so that too becomes a part of the networking. And you just make it all become a part of the benefit package. I'm to doodles with you. Yeah, FII is definitely the way. They already have the platform. So that's saving us less time for them to have to build it.
I love it. And maybe before Melissa and Brian come in and sort of talk about what they can do, we did get a question from the audience that I think will do a good job of maybe pushing a little bit and adding on to what already Michelle and Brenda have shared. But, you know, Arthur from Boston asked, we're already dependent on wealthy donors. How do we educate and then convince them to give unrestricted operating grants and relinquishing power? It's been said that people don't give you power. You have to take it from them. How do we convince our donors to give away their power? So maybe in thinking about what that next actionable step is, how do we get them to relinquish that power?
So for me, I feel that it's time for us to really take a deeper dive into how we've built and designed our communities. And truly, I think it's time for us to really commit ourselves to creating a liberated community, right? Or a community that is free of oppression for people. And if we truly want a society that is liberated and free of oppression, then it takes us to into the exploration of the systems and institutions that we have designed and created that are oppressing people, right? And in the history of the United States of America, we have to start having real conversations around the role that institutional racism has played in the design and the development of those systems, right? And so I would say for government leaders and philanthropic leaders, therein lies really the work. And if you truly sort of begin to understand, we always talk about history is so important in the work that we do because it gives context to why we see what we see, right? And I think about in the case of Austin, we had JP Morgan did a report for us a couple of years ago where they looked at the racial wealth gap for our city, and they went back to 1980. And our reality is that Black and brown families were financially better off in 1980 than they are today. And you think about a city like Austin that's had such this huge economic sort of prosperity run from the 1990s up until today, that Black and brown families didn't benefit from that. And I would say that they didn't benefit from that because of institutional racism and how a lot of our systems were designed and who had access to that and who didn't have access to that. So I feel that that we as government and philanthropy, that if we truly are committing to really sort of having this world or society that is liberated and free of this oppression, then it has to take us into this space, right? And I think that these conversations become a lot less controversial and a lot easier for us to see the pathway of what the right thing really is to do. And, you know, I would sort of say for us, then, you know, that's the mission, right? That's the goal. And that's the work. And I feel that we need to probably have more of that, of the deeper level conversations around the context and what we see. And it shouldn't be so hard for us to give up and share power, right? We should, because we understand the history and the context and why we see what we see, we understand what's needed to actually undo it and reverse that, right?
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Brian.
If I can I just kind of jump in here
Absolutely.
for 1 second? I do want to add that I know if it's Alaska, or I'm just using that as an example, Texas is an all state. Let's use it. They could give money because they give money to all their citizens once a year. They get a check based off of, we could get the surplus checks. You could give it back in to the community. Give it to the community, the people. Let the people reap the benefits. And I will say this, in Black and brown communities, stop gerrymandering our districts, stop regentrification. And if you allow a builder to come in and build $500,000 homes, then 3 of them at least need to be affordable so that the people in the neighborhoods that you are regentrifying can at least afford to move up. And so I wanted to throw that out there.
I appreciate that. And you know what I was going to say, actually just give Melissa, would you add anything else on relinquishing power?
Yeah, I would just add a couple of things. One is I wouldn't underestimate the moment we're in right now in terms of a country and dealing with kind of our racial history, the racial injustice that is happening. I think lots of donors and foundations and philanthropic partners are really kind of doing their own reckoning of where they've been and where they should be going. The other piece I would say is, I appreciated the, like, you have to take your power, but also I would encourage people to realize the power you do have. Here's the secret: philanthropy needs nonprofits. We need organizations. We're not the ones doing the strategies and all the tactics. And so, you know, understanding as these organizations and nonprofits that are doing the work on the ground, you have a lot of power in saying what you need, and in particularly in this moment. We need you just as much as you need us, and probably we need you more. So please recognize that you do have your own power and realize that. I would say finally, you know, there are tons of donors and foundations that have signed pledges to commit to general operating funds, to changing the way they're doing their grant making. There's lots of conversations around trust-based philanthropy. Seek out those donors, because they're very public pledges that people are taking, foundation leaders are taking, and if the ones that you have aren't working for you, I do think it's conversations and finding the right founders who will support your work and truly understand the great work you're doing on the ground, because as I've said, you know, philanthropy needs nonprofits, organizations just as much as, if not more than you need us.
Well said. And I'll say 2 things in your comments that really resonated with me. One is, Brian, your point, like, this is the time for us to start leading into having some really difficult conversations about what we're really trying to do. And if in philanthropy and even in addressing the issue of poverty, we're not thinking about these systems that are structurally keeping people poor, you're missing something. And let us help you in thinking about how to overcome those. And they're not easy, because a lot of resources have been spent, $400 billion a year in this industry. But we do feel like there's an opportunity to, if we start having those conversations, we can. And Melissa, to your point, if you get this, then find an individual that you could really, you know, who's having a problem with it, and talk to them. I know that for us to be able to grow this movement and this work, and having a strength-based approach adopted is going to take bringing folks along with you, not just you being able to do it for yourself. 2 quick questions that I have on the chats here. So one is, FII has made a complete shift away from facilitating in-person networking and to the Up Together platform as that tool. especially given the pandemic. I absolutely love the breadth of networking opportunities offered through the platform, but I also see the benefit of in local networking. I'm trying to bring Up Together to Charlottesville, Virginia. And that's a question from Alan. And Alan, and for everybody else, what I would say first is, if you wanted to join FII, you can go on to uptogether.org and get on the wait list to be able to start your own group and start being able to participate in the platform and potentially being able to receive dollars as folks are bringing them on. What I would also say is our work here is that we know that community is happening. We know that people are connecting and supporting one another. How do we continue to strengthen a tool through Up Together that can help strengthen those ties and grow them? And that's really the work of the platform, and it includes being able to create meeting times and use whatever webinar or phone conversation you want to be able to do, as well as to connect with other people inside of it. So that is something that is already has grown and will continue to grow, so that we can take this to scale. As in the last year, we've grown by the hundreds of thousands in getting folks to benefit from uptogether.org. And then the second question is a question from Sarah. Resources are not unlimited. So how is it determined which families participate in FII, and or how much funding should be distributed to each family? So what I would say just to that quickly is, historically, we've really relied on getting a critical mass of funding at a specific site. And then we would put a dollar amount to how many households we could do. And so depending on the fundraising that we're able to do, so in a city like Chicago or Austin, which we launched 2 years ago, we were able to give ourselves the goal of 500 households in each, as we've raised the dollars needed to meet those commitments. Today, we really are dismantling that and are trying to help philanthropy see that they can act. They don't need to wait for us to formalize that process. Through Up Together, they can come on, put dollars as little as 100,000, as much as billions of dollars. And on the other side, we already have the families waiting and being able to do, and then they can determine the amounts of dollars that they want to contribute. And so I'll give a quick example of that. In San Antonio, we have a funder who's really interested in lifting and learning around their educational practices and wants to be able to invest in individual households who are dealing with distance learning up to $2,000, right? And so it's really in our conversations and working with them and how to be able to structure that through Up Together and disperse it. But it's a blank canvas in that way, as long as you're meeting these core principles that we are promoting in our strength-based approach. Another question from Wes. Can you address the cliff effects? Much needed government assistance often falls short and then acts as a disincentive for people to advance their earning potential as they make more money. Philanthropy may be able to bridge the gap between government assistance and earned wages. What are your thoughts? And I'll leave that as a closing question before we wrap up here, if anybody wants to jump in.
So I'm happy to jump in because I experienced the cliff effect. When I first became a single mom, I had to go on public assistance. And as I said earlier, I worked really hard over the 10 years. And at every stage that I earned more, I got less. And so the cliff effect to me, and we've talked, and I've had this discussion over and over, you know, I think folks will not experience that cliff effect if you allow them to hold on to whatever benefits that they currently have once they get to that cap for at least a year. For me, like, you know, when we talk about whether it's employment or whatever, we look at the bell curve, right? We look at that curve and we figure, okay, within a year, you should have experienced the highs and the lows, right? And so one way, I think, to address cliff effects is to not take away. When a family, you know, give them a chance. Give them, you know, again, and I keep going back to leveling the playing field. You know, it's not equity as a person achieves more to take some away, there is no way you can keep up with that. And so I don't know, that's my simple opinion, my humble opinion. I know that FII really helped me deal with the cliff effect, because although I got to a point that I was earning money, I had my own student loan bills. I could not afford to send, and then the cost to send my daughter to college was more than I paid. So that's my thought on that.
And if I could
Yeah,
just piggyback on
Please,
her
Brenda,
too.
please.
I agree. Sometimes it takes all of the things that you get, all the benefits that you get to get ahead. So I agree with you 100% that, Melissa, that if you earn an extra dollar, they take this away, which is why FII's idea of they give it to you without penalizing you for it. And there's a stereotype that poor folks, if you're not a poor person or you haven't experienced that, I was raised by my father, a single father, and so we certainly went through things, but they assume that, oh, well, they're getting food stamps and that, I live on a fixed income, that I don't qualify for it. They, for whatever reason, think my little few dollars is enough for me to live on. So just imagine, I'm just thinking, if they think that I'm okay, then what about the single mother that has 4 children and they give her a minimum amount of money thinking these 4 kids are going to eat this. She ends up in the food bank line. She ends up, and if she goes and get a part-time job, that few little food stamps that she's getting is gone. So now the money that she's making that would have kind of helped her in somewhere else is she's having to spend it on food. So yes, I do agree with you. You need all of it sometimes to get up ahead, because remember, we're starting from the back, trying to work our way out of it. And I think a lot of people think, well, once they're on services and we give this, it just repeats and they're draining the system. Nobody wants to ask for help. Most people want things and they want to be able to obtain them themselves. Life circumstances, systematic racism. I mean, there are a lot of issues that we deal with coming out the door before we even deal with what the world is giving us.
Can I just pop in and say, because Brenda, you made me think about, believe it or not, there are some people that believe that poor people shouldn't have a bank account, that you shouldn't have a little bit of money in the bank, that you don't need a cushion. And so I think it's just really shifting how we're thinking, how we're thinking when we look at, and I think it was Brian that started, and you talked about being poor. And it's almost like it's a bad thing, or it's a curse. It's a circumstance that happened because of, all the things that's going on around you. And so, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. That's what happened.
I appreciate it, but those negative stereotypes and racist beliefs and practices that have informed policies and practices, like the cliff effects, are really, if we don't understand that, and if we don't change our thinking, and for us, we believe that you need to promote a new way of thinking and a new way of investment as people are doing better, so they don't have to make those $20,000 to $30,000 leaps. I should also mention too, from our, as an organization, we work with, I always mention, our accountants and lawyers to ensure that we're following our giving rules, but all of the dollars that we're investing in people are actually not reported as income, and so they don't have a negative effect to these individual households. And our hope is that we can continue to lift the evidence so that those practices stop, that penalizing stops, and that's really important. Just want to pause for a minute and see, as we wrap up, if there's any final thoughts that you would like to share with the group.
So I think I became a FII partner in 2012 or 2013, something like that. And my group, I was part of a group of amazing women. And I just want to say that we are all still connected. We are all still friends, and each and every one of us has started a nonprofits or a scholarship. And so I think that the example that FII that modeled for us is something that we continue to do. And so as a woman who grew up never having best friends, I can say that today, because of FII, I have best friends.
I'll just add, being part of that group of women in our grant making process has been so rewarding. You can add to that list FII partners who are also grant makers, because, when we talked about the success of one of the programs we invested in recently, nothing brought me more joy than to have one of the family partners just say, look what we did, and it was just like the pride and joy of what they had accomplished and what they helped us to do. I mean, let me just be very clear. The pride and joy I felt just from having it be so rewarding for them, but also, more probably rewarding for me and our work is truly there. And I do encourage those who are interested in kind of exploring this model. I'm happy to talk at any point where you might be able to engage families directly into your grant making. There's other resources. Maybe you're not ready for that part. Maybe you're interested in more finding feedback in from grant partners or beneficiaries. There's tons of resources out there. I'm happy to help in whatever way, but me and Brian and a few of us across the country can't be changing this whole system if we're not doing it together. So the more that I am available as a resource, I know Brian is nodding his head as anybody wants to be thought partnership in any of this, happy to do so, because I hope that everyone has the same feeling I have when a family partner says, look what we did together.
And if I could just add that FII is more than just giving the money. It is the networking. And through the networking, I know just with my team, we're still doing things, and everyone in our group is involved in the community more. We can't wait to share information. Here, this is where this is where that. So that within itself is worth weight in gold. And then add the money to it. It makes it go even further. I'm saying it's twofold. Yes, you give money, but it's the networking and getting to know people and them directing. Maybe they don't know, they know somewhere to go that you don't, or how to do something, or how to get a grant to go to school. It's so much more. It's bringing people together.
And, and I think for me personally, it's my relationship with FII has just been a personal journey. One in actually sort of not being ashamed of being poor, not being ashamed of struggling to make ends meet. And it honestly wasn't until, how you have things in your life that are there, but you gotta, sometimes there's an event that exposes it. And that workshop for me just really personally exposed a lot of things that I had been holding on from my youth that I wasn't even aware of until I started to openly talk about it. And I feel like FII is an organization that's really pushing to turn that around, and having us really see the beauty and the strength and the assets that are in our community, as opposed to seeing the deficits that are in the community. And I just think that that's a beautiful thing. We do a workshop for our city. It's called Undoing Racism by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And as part of the workshop, one of the things that we talk about is, why are people poor, right? And it's exploration of looking at how systems sort of lead to why people are poor, and we also challenge a lot of the assumptions sometimes that are made around people that experience poverty, like trust issues. Are they going to use the money the right way? And we like to say, are there rich people that don't use money the right way? As actually a person in leadership who's been bankrupt like 5 times. Think about that though, right? And how we sort of view things as society, right? Of who's, who's responsible and who's not, right? And the reality is that we all do those things regardless of income, right? We all can, we say, be trifling sometimes, and that's all of us, right? And the reverse of that too, right? So I really appreciate, I really appreciate the relationship. I appreciate the partnership. I appreciate the push to get us to really sort of open our eyes and see things different as an institution ourselves in our relationship with FI.
Thank you. Really appreciate all of you. I feel like we could do this for another hour and a half or however long it's been. Just thank you. Let me just say, I'll say a couple of quick closing remarks. One is that a lot of us think about poverty and want to be able to act. And what I would leave you with is that you don't have to act. People who are struggling in poverty are acting every day. What we need to do is to act differently, is to recognize them and invest in them and support them as they see fit, not as we think. And that will be Justin, Melissa, your point, as well as Brian, yours, on the personable component of it, in feeling that you are contributing just as much as if you felt like you were leading into creating the silver bullet here, because those relationships are, as Brenda and Michelle said, everything. So thank you all. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. I want to thank you all again for joining us, especially our panelists, Brian, Brenda, Melissa, and Michelle. We've had a productive afternoon together, but the work is just beginning. Keep an eye out for an email from our team on ways that you can give cash, relinquish power, and learn more about partnering with us at FII. And thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to staying connected in the coming months as well as beyond. Thank you.